Samantha Brooks thought she had finally figured life out. At 34 years old, she had built something she could be proud of. A successful architectural career designing public buildings across Boston, a beautiful brownstone apartment in Back Bay, and in just 48 hours, she was going to marry David Harrison, the kind, stable man from a good family who represented everything her chaotic childhood wasn't. For 6 years, Samantha had lived without her mother Margaret in her life, and those 6 years had been the most peaceful she'd ever known. The final argument had been brutal. Margaret demanding money again, playing the victim, making threats. And Samantha had finally said no. Margaret had screamed that walking away from family was unforgivable, that Samantha would regret this, that she'd come crawling back eventually because they always did. But Samantha never went back. She built her fortress brick by brick, seeing a therapist twice a month, learning that no contact was sometimes the only healthy choice. On that Tuesday morning, 48 hours before her wedding, Samantha grabbed her coffee and headed to her front door. She had a dress fitting at 11, a florist meeting at 2, dinner with David's parents at 7. Her calendar was color-coded and perfect. Everything was finally perfect. The package was sitting on her doorstep. Brown paper, no return address. Samantha assumed it was a wedding gift, maybe from David's overseas cousin or a college friend who couldn't attend. She brought it inside, set it on her kitchen counter, and opened it while her coffee cooled. Inside was a leather journal, worn and stained. Newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Photographs that made her hands shake before her brain could process what she was seeing. The clippings were about her father's death. Thomas Brooks, found dead in the garage of his home 28 years ago. Ruled a suicide. Samantha had been 6 years old. The photographs were crime scene photos. Her childhood home, her father's body, details she'd never wanted to see. And the journal was in her mother's handwriting. Samantha read the first page with trembling hands. Samantha, you always wondered why I never talked about that night. Here's the truth. I'm dying, and I need you one more time, or everyone learns what you did too. See you at the wedding. Mom. Her perfect life started cracking like ice under pressure. Samantha didn't go to her dress fitting. She called and canceled, claiming food poisoning. David was at his office for a partner meeting that would run until evening. She had hours alone with the journal, and some terrible instinct told her she needed to read it all before deciding anything. She sat on her living room floor and opened to the second page. Margaret's handwriting was neat and precise. The journal read like a confession, but there was no remorse in it. It was clinical, almost proud. Margaret had been having an affair. Thomas discovered it. He threatened divorce, threatened to take Samantha, threatened to expose Margaret's boyfriend who was married with his own family. They argued. And Margaret decided the simplest solution was to make Thomas disappear. She'd researched it, looked into medications and dosages and methods that would mimic depression. Thomas had struggled with anxiety years earlier, so there was medical history to exploit. Margaret mixed sleeping pills into his drink one night, waited for him to get drowsy, then helped him into the garage and staged it to look like he'd hung himself. Samantha read those pages 3 times, trying to process them. Her mother had written about murder the way someone might write about planning a party. The police had investigated, of course, but suicide was ruled based on Thomas's medical history and the scene evidence. Case closed, except it wasn't closed. An insurance company suspected foul play, a $500,000 life insurance policy that Margaret collected. They'd opened their own investigation, and this is where the journal got truly chilling. Margaret described paying off the detective. $20,000 cash, plus threats about what would happen to his career if he kept digging. The investigation was dropped. Margaret got the insurance money. Life went on. But the final entry made Samantha's blood run cold. Margaret wrote that Samantha had helped her that night, that she didn't remember because she was so young, so easy to manipulate. But Margaret had proof. Insurance investigators had taken photos of everything, including the evidence bags before disposal. Samantha's little handprints were visible in the enhanced photos. If Samantha ever abandoned Margaret completely, if she ever tried to expose her, Margaret would make sure everyone knew Samantha had been her accomplice. Even at 6 years old, the optics would destroy her. Samantha had been leverage for 28 years. This wasn't a confession. This was a weapon. Samantha barely slept that night. David came home from his meeting and found her on the couch. He assumed she was stressed about the wedding. She let him believe it. What else could she say? My mother murdered my father and I helped dispose of evidence as a child? The words wouldn't come. The next morning, while David went to the gym, Samantha drove to the Boston Public Library. She couldn't risk searching on her home computer or phone. She needed a public terminal, something untraceable. She spent 4 hours in the basement archives pulling up old newspaper articles about Thomas Brooks's death. The suicide had made local papers. A family tragedy. A woman left widowed with a young daughter. Sympathy pieces about mental health. But 3 weeks later, there was a smaller article about Harbor Mutual Life Insurance questioning the death ruling before releasing the policy payout. They cited irregularities. The investigation was ongoing. Samantha searched for follow-ups. Nothing. The story died completely. No resolution articles. No mention of the investigation ever concluding. She found the original detective's name in police reports. Detective Frank Morrison, Boston PD. Retired now, living in a suburb south of the city. Samantha called him from a payphone outside the library. Yes, payphones still existed. Detective Morrison remembered the case. When Samantha asked what happened to the insurance investigation, there was a long pause. She could hear him breathing on the other end. Then he told her someone with money had made that case disappear. Not him. Above his pay grade. He'd been told to drop it, that the insurance company was satisfied. He knew something was wrong, but he had a family, a pension. And Margaret had connections he didn't want to mess with. He told Samantha to be careful. Whatever she thought she knew about her mother, it was probably worse. Then he hung up. Samantha stood in that payphone booth with her hands shaking. The detective had been threatened off the case. Margaret had paid for her freedom 28 years ago, and nobody had stopped her. If you've ever struggled with a toxic family member, you need to hear the rest of this story because what happens next will change everything you think about family obligation. Make sure you're subscribed because this journey is just beginning, and trust me, the ending will shock you. Samantha had never known her father's side of the family. Margaret always said they blamed her for Thomas's death, that they'd cut off contact, that it was too painful. Samantha believed it because she was a child, then a teenager, then an adult who learned not to question Margaret's stories. But now she was questioning everything. She found her father's family through ancestry websites and social media. Thomas had one sibling, a sister named Elizabeth Brooks, now Elizabeth Montgomery. She lived in Connecticut, 2 hours from Boston. Samantha called her. A woman answered. When Samantha identified herself as Thomas Brooks's daughter, she heard a sharp intake of breath. Elizabeth asked where she was and told her to come immediately. Samantha didn't tell David where she was going, she just said wedding errands. He kissed her forehead and told her not to stress. Elizabeth's house was a tidy colonial in a quiet neighborhood. She opened the door before Samantha could knock. A woman in her 60s, with Samantha's father's eyes. They stared at each other for a moment. Then Elizabeth pulled Samantha into a hug so tight it hurt. Inside, over tea, Samantha showed Elizabeth the journal. Elizabeth read it with no surprise on her face. When she finished, she looked up and said she'd been waiting 28 years for someone to believe her. She'd always known Margaret killed Thomas. She'd tried to fight for visitation rights after the death, but Margaret threatened to claim Elizabeth was unstable, harassing a grieving widow. Margaret had money for lawyers. Elizabeth didn't. So she lost access to Samantha completely, but Elizabeth never stopped investigating. She pulled out a thick file folder containing 28 years of private investigation work, newspaper clippings, timelines, and she'd discovered something horrifying. Margaret's boyfriend at the time, the man she'd been having the affair with, was named Robert Sutton. Married, 2 kids, worked in real estate. 3 weeks before he was scheduled to testify to the insurance investigators, Robert Sutton disappeared. His car was found abandoned near a hiking trail in New Hampshire. Search teams found no body. His wife filed a missing person report. The case went cold. Robert Sutton was never seen again. Elizabeth believed Margaret killed him to silence him, but she couldn't prove it. Samantha felt the floor tilting beneath her. Her mother might be a serial killer, and Samantha had been kept as insurance against exposure, not a daughter, a hostage. That night, Samantha had nightmares. She was 6 years old again in her childhood bedroom with the unicorn wallpaper. Someone was shaking her shoulder. "Mommy needs help." The dream felt wrong, too vivid, too real. Not a dream. A memory. She woke up gasping. David asked if she was okay. "Just wedding nerves," she lied. But her heart was racing, and some door in her mind had cracked open. The next morning, while David showered, Samantha called a trauma therapist she didn't know, someone Margaret had no connection to. She booked an emergency session for that afternoon, paying extra. In Dr. Patricia Chen's Cambridge office, Samantha sat on the leather couch and said she was recovering memories of something that happened when she was 6. They spent 2 hours there. Dr. Chen explained that childhood memory suppression was real, especially for traumatic events, and that external triggers like Margaret's journal could break the seal. She guided Samantha through accessing the memories. The memory came back in fragments, being shaken awake. Margaret's face, makeup smeared, eyes wild. "I need your help, baby," walking downstairs in star pajamas, the kitchen light too bright, a trash bag on the floor, heavy and bulky. "Help Mommy carry this to the car. We're going to play a game. You can't tell anyone about this game." Samantha's small hands gripping the bag. It was heavy. She didn't know what was inside. They put it in the trunk. Good girl. Such a good helper. Back inside, Margaret washing Samantha's hands in the kitchen sink. Scrubbing hard, too hard, until Samantha's skin was pink and sore. "We have to get really clean. Then back to bed, tucked in. You have school tomorrow. Forget about tonight." It was just a dream. But it wasn't a dream. Samantha came back to the present with tears streaming down her face. Dr. Chen told her firmly that she was 6 years old, that she didn't know what she was doing, that children follow their parents' instructions. She wasn't responsible. But Samantha's hands were shaking, and she could feel the weight of that bag again, and she knew her childhood innocence hadn't just been stolen, it had been weaponized. She'd been turned into an unwitting accomplice in her own father's murder. During the drive back, Samantha's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It was Margaret claiming she was at Mass General Hospital, that doctors said she needed to prepare Samantha. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 to 8 months to live, maybe less. She knew they hadn't spoken and didn't expect forgiveness, but she hoped Samantha would let her see her happy at the wedding tomorrow before she died. "I love you, Mom." The message was perfectly crafted. Humble, vulnerable, just the right amount of medical detail. Margaret was dying and wanted one last chance to see her daughter, except Samantha had read the journal. She knew Margaret was coming to the wedding. Some instinct told her this was another lie. She called Elizabeth and asked for a private investigator who could verify a medical diagnosis quickly. Elizabeth's PI contact found what they needed. Hospital records obtained through questionable methods showed no cancer diagnosis, no treatment, no oncologist, no hospital stays. Physical surveillance over the past week showed Margaret at a salon getting her hair done, at a boutique buying expensive clothes, at a gym taking Pilates. Margaret wasn't dying. Margaret was perfectly healthy. The terminal illness was completely fabricated. Emotional leverage designed to make everyone sympathetic. Poor Margaret, dying of cancer, just wants to see her daughter one last time. Who could be cruel enough to deny a dying mother? Even dying was a lie. Even sympathy was a weapon. When Samantha got home, David was waiting with Thai takeout and champagne. "Last dinner as an engaged couple," he said, kissing her. "Tomorrow you'll be Mrs. Harrison." Samantha looked at the man she loved, the man whose parents were retired police officers with impeccable reputations, the man who came from a family that believed in rules and justice. She realized she had to tell him, but not tonight. Tonight she smiled and ate pad thai and pretended everything was fine. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Beacon Hill, upscale, intimate, 40 guests. David's parents, George and Linda Harrison, had insisted on hosting. They were generous people who'd welcomed Samantha completely. George was a retired police captain. Linda had been a detective. Both had served Boston PD for decades with spotless records. Samantha had specifically told the restaurant that Margaret Brooks was not invited. She'd given them a photo. Security was briefed. Margaret was not on the guest list and not getting through the door, but Margaret had spent 63 years learning how to get what she wanted. Samantha was sitting at the head table watching David toast his parents when she saw Margaret walk through the main entrance. Navy blue dress, elegant and expensive. She'd lost weight deliberately to look frail. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand on the wall for support. The performance of a cancer patient making one final effort. The hostess didn't stop her. Security didn't stop her. George Harrison actually stood up and helped Margaret to a seat. Linda said warmly that they were so glad she could make it, that Samantha had said she wasn't feeling well. Margaret smiled weakly. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." Everyone in the room saw a frail, dying mother. Only Samantha saw the predator. David leaned over and whispered that he didn't know her mom was coming, that this was great, maybe a fresh start. Samantha couldn't speak. She watched as Margaret charmed the table, made self-deprecating jokes about being a difficult mother, said all the right things about second chances and regret. When Margaret stood to give a toast, Samantha's whole body went rigid. Margaret said she hadn't been the mother Samantha deserved. She'd made mistakes, let her own pain damage their relationship, but watching Samantha grow into this incredible woman had been the greatest joy of her life. "Samantha, I'm so proud of you. And David, welcome to our little family. Take care of my girl." Everyone applauded. Some people were crying. George Harrison clapped Margaret on the shoulder and said that took courage. Samantha wanted to scream. She wanted to tell everyone the truth. But in a room full of retired cops, what could she say? "My mother murdered my father and I helped as a child?" Margaret caught Samantha's eye and mouthed, "We need to talk." 20 minutes later, Samantha followed Margaret into the bathroom. Empty, thank God. Margaret dropped the frail act instantly. Her voice was cold and sharp. "We need to go somewhere private. Tonight? Now." Samantha said she wasn't going anywhere. Margaret's response was chilling. "Yes, you are. Because if you cause a scene here, if you try to expose me in front of all these lovely people, including David's police family, I'll tell them exactly what you did as a child. They'll listen to me. I'm the grieving, dying mother. You're the stressed bride having a breakdown. Who do you think they'll believe?" So, Samantha drove Margaret to the house where her father died, the house Margaret still owned like some sick shrine. They stood in the living room where it all happened 28 years ago. Margaret didn't sit down. She pulled a manila folder from her designer handbag and dropped it on the coffee table. "This is what I need from you. A sworn affidavit stating that on the night your father died, I was at your elementary school spring play. The program has photos of me there earlier in the evening. That part's true. But I left early and nobody saw me after 7:30. Your statement fills that gap. You'll say I stayed the whole time, that we drove home together, that I was with you all night." Samantha said she was 6 years old and didn't remember a school play. Margaret smiled. "Exactly. You don't remember. Which makes your statement unprovable either way. But with my photos and your sworn statement, my timeline becomes airtight. The police can't place me at home during the time of death. Case closed." "I'm not signing a false affidavit," Samantha said. Margaret opened the folder. Inside were documents Samantha had never seen. Affidavits from witnesses claiming Samantha had been asking strange questions about writing a murder mystery over the past 6 months. Bills from handwriting experts Margaret had paid to examine the journal and claim it was recently created. A paper trail suggesting Samantha wrote that journal as part of a creative writing project gone wrong. "If you take that journal to police," Margaret said, "my lawyers will prove you fabricated it. You'll look like an unstable woman having a breakdown, making up elaborate stories about her mother." And then there's the other evidence. She pulled out crime scene photos showing 6-year-old Samantha's handprints on evidence bags. You helped me that night. You carried evidence to the car. Your prints are on those bags. You were 6 years old, but prosecutors won't care. Defense attorneys will argue you're liable as an accessory. They'll drag you through depositions, testimony, media coverage. Your architecture firm will drop you. David's family, those good cops with their good reputation, will pressure him to walk away. No one wants to marry into a murder scandal. Margaret stepped closer. I want you to sign the affidavit. I want you to shut up about the journal. And I want you to understand something very clearly. You walk down that aisle tomorrow, you marry David, you live your perfect little life, but you're never truly free of me. Because I know what you did. And if you ever try to cut me out again, if you ever try to expose me, I will burn your life to the ground. She placed a pen on the affidavit. Your choice, sweetheart. Sign or watch everything burn. Drop a comment right now if your jaw just dropped, because what happens next is even more insane. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because you won't believe how Samantha responds to this impossible choice. Samantha didn't sign that night. She drove home at 2 in the morning, her mind spinning. David was asleep on the couch, having waited up for her until he couldn't stay awake. She covered him with a blanket and sat on the floor staring at nothing. The wedding was in 8 hours. At 6 in the morning, David woke up and found her still sitting there. Sam, are you okay? What happened with your mom? Something in Samantha broke. I need to tell you something, she said, and it's going to change everything. She told him all of it. The journal, the murder, the blackmail, her involvement as a child, the affidavit Margaret wanted her to sign, the threat to expose everything at the wedding. David listened, his face going pale, then shocked, then unreadable. When she finished, he pulled her into a hug. Jesus, Sam, why didn't you tell me earlier? I didn't know how, she said. Okay, we'll figure this out. We'll go to the police. His phone rang. His father. David listened, his face changing. When he hung up, he looked at Samantha differently. My mom and dad are coming over. They want to talk. George and Linda Harrison arrived 30 minutes later. Both had that cop look, assessing and analytical. George spoke first. Samantha, we need you to understand something. What your mother did is monstrous. But you've known about this for 3 days and didn't report it. That's obstruction of justice. I was processing, Samantha said. You were obstructing, George replied, and the fact that you touched evidence as a child, even unknowingly, makes you vulnerable. A defense attorney would crucify you on the stand. Linda added that Margaret had clearly prepared for this. She had witnesses, documentation, an entire paper trail designed to discredit Samantha. If she went to police now, she'd be investigated too. Her reputation, her career, everything she'd built would be gone. So what do I do? Samantha asked. George and Linda exchanged a look. Then Linda said carefully that Samantha needed to think about David's career, his reputation. This family had served Boston PD for 40 years. We have a reputation to protect. Are you saying I should sign the affidavit? Samantha asked. Linda replied that sometimes the legal system fails, sometimes justice isn't possible, and you need to ask yourself what you're willing to sacrifice. Samantha turned to David. What do you think? He looked at his parents, then at her. I think we should postpone the wedding. The word hung in the air like poison. Postpone? Not cancel, he said, just until this is cleared up, until we know what's going to happen legally. You mean until you know if I'm going to be arrested, Samantha said. That's not fair, David started. You're right, Samantha interrupted. What's fair is this. I'm going to the police with everything, and you're free to go. David's face crumbled. Sam, don't do this. We can figure it out. No, David, we can't. Because your parents are right. This will destroy your family's reputation. It'll destroy mine too. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. She turned to George and Linda. I spent my whole childhood being manipulated by Margaret. I'm not spending the rest of my life being manipulated by fear. She looked at David one last time. I love you, but I can't marry someone who's going to ask me to protect a murderer to save his reputation. David didn't argue. That was the worst part. He just looked at his parents. And Samantha saw the truth. He'd already made his choice. She walked out. Samantha called Aunt Elizabeth and told her everything. Elizabeth arrived with her lawyer, a criminal defense attorney she'd kept on retainer for years, hoping for this exact moment. They went to the Boston Police Department together. They found a young detective who actually listened. Samantha gave them everything: the journal, the photos, Elizabeth's investigation, the recovered memories, the blackmail attempt. All of it. The detective's face was grim. "This is going to take time," he said, "and I need to be honest with you. Your mother has prepared well. The evidence against her is old. The witness statements she's fabricated create reasonable doubt, and your involvement as a child, even though you were only 6, complicates things." "I know," Samantha said. "You'll be investigated too. It's procedure." "I know." The detective nodded. "We'll do everything we can." The media got hold of the story within a week. Daughter accuses mother of 28-year-old murder made headlines. Then architect involved in evidence disposal as child followed. The fact that Samantha was 6 didn't matter to the internet. They devoured it. Margaret's lawyer released a statement. Margaret Brooks is a grieving mother whose terminally ill condition has prompted her estranged daughter to fabricate these cruel accusations in a clear mental health crisis. We intend to pursue defamation charges. The cancer lie continued even in her defense. David sent one text. "I'm sorry, I hope you understand that was it. And that." Years of love reduced to one cowardly text message. Samantha's firm put her on indefinite leave. "Until the legal situation resolves," they said. They meant until we know if you're going to be charged. Her face was on the news. Her clients saw the headlines. Former clients, actually. Nobody wanted an architect associated with murder. 6 months later, the legal battle was still ongoing. Margaret's trial was scheduled, but prosecutors were pessimistic. The evidence was old. Margaret had money for excellent lawyers. Robert Sutton's disappearance couldn't be conclusively linked. The journal's authenticity was disputed in court. It would be Margaret's word against Samantha's, and Margaret had spent decades building credibility. Samantha's investigation as a potential accessory was dropped. She'd been 6 years old, clearly manipulated. The detective and the DA agreed no charges would be filed against her, but the damage was done. Her face had been on the news. Her name was searchable online. Her reputation was destroyed. She lived alone now in a small apartment in Somerville. Contract work, remote jobs, nothing that required face-to-face meetings. She saw Dr. Chen twice a week, talked to Aunt Elizabeth every Sunday, avoided social media entirely. Her friends from before had mostly drifted away. Murder accusations tend to do that, even when you're the victim. David had married someone else, a woman from his law firm, someone with no scandals, no murdered fathers, no complicated past. Samantha saw the announcement on a mutual friend's Facebook page before she deleted her account. She felt nothing. The part of her that could feel that kind of pain had been cauterized. One Saturday morning, Elizabeth came over with coffee and bagels. They sat on Samantha's tiny balcony watching traffic. "Was it worth it?" Elizabeth asked. Samantha thought about that, about everything she'd lost, the wedding, the career, the reputation, the perfect life she'd built brick by brick. "I lost everything," Samantha said. "Except yourself," Elizabeth replied. "Some days that doesn't feel like enough," Samantha admitted. "But it's all you have." Samantha nodded. It was true. She'd lost her career, her fiancé, her reputation, her perfect life, but she'd walked away from Margaret with something more important: the truth. And herself. She wasn't healed. She wasn't happy. She probably never would be completely, but she was free. Margaret might die in prison, or she might die free. The trial could go either way. Prosecutors had warned her that getting a conviction after 28 years with a journal of disputed authenticity would be nearly impossible. But either way, Margaret would die, never having broken Samantha completely. That was the ending. Not happy, not wrapped up in a neat bow with justice served and evil punished, but honest. Samantha looked at her aunt and said, "You know what the therapist told me? She said some people spend their whole lives seeking validation from parents who will never give it, and the moment you stop seeking it, you're free." "Are you free?" Elizabeth asked. Samantha thought about it, really thought about the nightmares that still woke her up, about the career she'd never get back, about seeing David's wedding announcement and feeling the ghost of what could have been, about checking the news obsessively for updates on Margaret's trial, about the way strangers looked at her when they recognized her face from the headlines. "I'm getting there," she said, and that was the truth. Not healed, not whole, but getting there. One day at a time, one therapy session at a time, one morning of waking up and choosing to keep breathing. The final scene of Samantha's story isn't dramatic. There's no courtroom victory, no tearful reconciliation, no moment where everything makes sense and the pain becomes worth it. It's just Samantha sitting on her balcony with cold coffee, her father's photo on the shelf inside, the journal long since turned over to police as evidence. She'd lost the life she wanted, the architectural career designing beautiful public spaces, the marriage to a good man from a good family, the respect of her peers, the innocence of believing hard work and good choices would protect her from her past. But she'd kept something more valuable. She'd kept the life she could live with. Some days that was enough. Some days it wasn't. Some days she woke up angry that doing the right thing had cost her everything, while Margaret might still walk free. Some days she woke up grateful that she'd escaped with her soul intact. Most days she just woke up and kept going because that's what survival looked like. Samantha learned that there's no manual for this, no guidebook for what to do when your mother is a murderer and turning her in means destroying yourself. The therapist had given her frameworks and coping strategies and validation that she'd done nothing wrong. But at the end of the day, Samantha had to live in her own skin, and she'd chosen the skin she could live in. The architect in her appreciated the bitter irony. She'd spent her career designing structures meant to feel safe, libraries where children could read without fear, community centers where families could gather, public spaces built on foundations of trust and stability, and her own life had been built on quicksand, a foundation of lies and murder that Margaret had poured decades ago. But here's what Samantha discovered in those 6 months after everything fell apart. You can build again. Not the same structure. You can't rebuild innocence or naivety or the belief that family means safety. But you can build something else. Something smaller and more honest. A life that doesn't look perfect from the outside but feels real from the inside. She had her tiny apartment. Her remote contract work designing small residential projects for clients who didn't Google her name. Her twice-weekly therapy sessions. Her Sunday calls with Elizabeth. Her collection of true crime podcasts that she listened to with grim recognition. A strange hobby for someone living through her own true crime story, but somehow it helped to know she wasn't alone in having a monster for a mother. Elizabeth had become the family Samantha should have had from the beginning. They talked about Thomas, about the man he'd been before Margaret killed him. Elizabeth shared stories Samantha had never heard. Thomas was funny, apparently, told terrible dad jokes, loved baseball, cried during sad movies, wanted to be a better father than his own father had been. Elizabeth painted a picture of a whole person, not just the absence that had haunted Samantha's childhood. On what would have been Samantha's wedding day, she didn't leave the apartment. She sat with the grief of it, let it move through her like a wave, cried for the life she'd lost. Then ordered Chinese food and watched bad reality TV until she fell asleep on the couch. The next day, she woke up and went back to work. Because that's what getting there looked like, not dramatic breakthroughs, just putting one foot in front of the other. Margaret's trial date kept getting pushed back. First it was postponed due to her lawyer filing motions to suppress evidence, then postponed again for additional psychological evaluations of Margaret. Her defense team was building a case that she was mentally unfit to stand trial, that she was a confused elderly woman being persecuted by an estranged daughter with mental health issues. Samantha watched it all unfold with a strange detachment. She'd done what she needed to do. She'd told the truth. Whether the justice system could handle that truth wasn't something she could control. Doctor. Chen reminded her in therapy that she'd already won the important battle. She'd escaped. She'd chosen herself. Everything else was just epilogue. But some days Samantha wanted more than survival. She wanted Margaret in prison. She wanted vindication. She wanted the world to know that she wasn't crazy, wasn't lying, wasn't the villain in this story. She wanted her father's death to mean something. She wanted Robert Sutton's disappearance to be investigated properly. She wanted justice for the 6-year-old girl who'd been weaponized against herself. Most days, though, she just wanted peace. And peace, she was learning, didn't come from external validation. It came from internal acceptance. Accepting that she'd done everything she could. Accepting that some things can't be fixed or healed or made right. Accepting that her mother was a monster and that wasn't Samantha's fault or her responsibility to fix. Accepting that she'd survived and that had to be enough. If this story hit different than you expected, you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fixing what's broken, it's walking away from the explosion. Drop a comment about your own experience with toxic family members. This community sees you. Subscribe for more stories that tell the truth instead of the fairy tale. And remember, you don't owe anyone your destruction, not even family, especially not family, because here's what Samantha wishes someone had told her at the beginning. That family isn't sacred just because they're blood. That some relationships are toxic and need to end. That protecting yourself isn't selfish. That you can love someone and still need to walk away from them. That forgiveness isn't always the answer, and sometimes the healthiest choice is permanent distance. She wishes someone had told her that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a happy ending. That sometimes the cost of truth is everything you've built. That you might lose your career and your relationship and your reputation and still have to wake up the next day and keep living. That survival isn't pretty or Instagram-worthy or wrapped up in a bow. But she also wishes someone had told her that you're stronger than you think, that you can lose everything and still wake up the next day, that grief and trauma don't follow a timeline, that healing isn't linear and some wounds never fully close, that you can be broken and functional at the same time, that getting there is a journey measured in tiny steps forward and occasional slides backward. Samantha Brooks didn't get her fairy tale ending. She didn't walk down the aisle. She didn't build the career she dreamed of. She didn't get justice in a courtroom with a satisfying guilty verdict. She didn't get closure or peace, or that moment where everything suddenly makes sense. What she got was this: a small apartment, a trauma therapist she sees twice a week, an aunt who actually loves her, contract work that pays the bills, the knowledge that she told the truth even when it cost her everything, the freedom of no longer carrying Margaret's secrets, the ability to look at herself in the mirror without shame. Some days that's enough, some days it's not. But it's real. And reality, Samantha has learned, is better than any perfect lie. Because the perfect life she'd built before was constructed on a foundation of secrets and suppressed memories and denial. It looked beautiful from the outside, but it was rotting from within. Better to have something small and honest than something grand and false. This is Samantha Brooks's story. A woman who had everything figured out until a package arrived and tore her world apart. A woman who discovered her mother was a murderer and that speaking truth would cost her everything. A woman who chose integrity over comfort and paid the price. A woman who lost her perfect life and gained something harder to define but more valuable: herself. She's not healed, she's not happy, she's not living her best life or finding silver linings or grateful for the journey. She's surviving, she's getting there, and some days that has to be enough.